Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'm going to start with the bears because the bears are where it started for me, and because starting with what I can document is a habit I've had for long enough that it's hard to break even now when I'm not sure documentation is the point anymore. I'm a wildlife biologist. I've been conducting a long-term population study on black bears in a 40 square mile section of national forest in northern Idaho for 3 seasons, which means I know this forest the way a person knows something they've been paying close attention to for an extended period. I know where the bears den and where they feed and where they move between those two activities. I know the deer trails and the elk corridors and the seasonal patterns of the smaller animals that share this range. I know which sections of the forest are productive habitat and which ones are marginal and why. And I know how to read the ground for signs of wildlife activity, the way some people read text. The 2 square mile section in the northwest corner of my study area has no wildlife activity. None. Not reduced activity, not seasonal variation, nothing. No bear sign across 3 seasons of intensive study, no deer trails, no evidence of elk passage, no small mammal runs, no bird nesting activity in the breeding season. The vegetation is healthy. The water sources are adequate. The habitat by every measurable criterion is suitable. There is no biological reason for the area to be empty of wildlife. It is empty of wildlife anyway, and it has been empty in exactly the same way across every season I've been watching it. I logged it as an anomaly in my first season and kept logging it and kept not having an explanation for it, and eventually started asking the people in Dre if they knew anything about it. That's when I learned about the Quiet Ground. Dre is a logging community of maybe 600 people, about 12 miles from the western edge of my study area. I'd been going there for supplies and the occasional meal at the one diner since I started the study, and I knew a handful of people there in the way you know people in a small town when you're a regular presence without being a resident. Faces and first names and the kind of conversation that happens over a counter or in a hardware store aisle. I started asking about the northwest section in my second season, describing the location as specifically as I could. The responses were consistent enough to notice. People knew what I was describing. They knew it without needing me to be very specific, which told me the location had a presence in the local awareness that didn't require precise coordinates, and they referred to it, every one of them, with the same 2 words: the Quiet Ground. Most of them didn't say much beyond that. A shrug, a subject change, the body language of someone who has decided they don't need to spend more time on a topic than they already have. A few said they didn't go there and left it at that. One man told me the animals knew better, said it with a finality that didn't invite follow-up, and walked away. The clearest account came from a woman named Bet, who ran the diner and who had the quality of someone who said true things plainly because she'd found that to be the most efficient approach to most situations. She told me people had been going into that section of forest for as long as anyone in Dre could remember. Not regularly, not in groups, just occasionally. The way people sometimes went into the woods for their own reasons, and the ones who spent real time in there, more than an hour or two, came back different. I asked her what different meant. She thought about it the way you think about something you've been observing for a long time and have never needed to put into words before. Then she said it wasn't anything you could point to. They weren't hurt. They weren't traumatized in any way she knew how to recognize. They were just subtly not the same people they'd been when they went in. Their priorities shifted in small ways. The things they talked about changed. The way they sat with silence changed. She said it was like something in there had made a small adjustment to them that they didn't know about and couldn't feel, but that was visible from the outside if you knew them well enough before and after. I asked if it was permanent. She said as far as she could tell. She said she'd known 3 people over the years who'd spent significant time in there, and none of them had shifted back. She said 2 of them had gone back in voluntarily more than once, and that by the time they stopped going back in, whatever adjustment had been made to them was substantial enough that she thought of them as different people than the ones she'd known before. She said all of this without drama, just the information she had, being shared with someone who'd asked. I drove back to my field station and wrote it up in my personal log, separate from the field data, and spent 2 days thinking about it before I decided to go in. I went on a clear morning in the 3rd week of October, fully equipped the way I was always fully equipped in the field. I told my departmental contact where I was going and approximately when to expect my check-in. I wasn't afraid. I want to be clear about that because I think it's relevant. I was curious in the specific professional way of a scientist approaching an anomaly with the intention of characterizing it. I had no framework for what Bet had described, and I'd decided the most responsible thing was to collect first-hand data. The edge of the quiet ground wasn't marked and didn't need to be. I understood when I crossed into it the way you understand a change in environment when you've been paying close enough attention to the environment for long enough. The forest looked the same. The trees were the same species and density. The ground cover was the same. The light through the canopy was the same thin October light I'd been working in all week. What was different was the quality of the silence. I've spent a lot of time in quiet forests, and I know what forest silence actually contains, which is a great deal. Wind movement, bird calls, the small sounds of animals moving through cover, the ambient texture of a living system going about its business. What the quiet ground contained was less of all of that. Not none of it, not an absolute absence, just less, in a way that accumulated the longer I was in there into something I noticed with a part of my awareness that wasn't the part I used for field work. I didn't see anything unusual. I didn't feel threatened. I found no physical feature of the landscape that would explain the wildlife absence. No contamination, no unusual geology, no structural reason for the space to function differently from the forest around it. I walked a systematic grid through about half the 2 square miles over 4 hours and logged what I found, which was a perfectly ordinary stretch of Idaho forest that happened to be empty of everything that should have been in it. I came out at early afternoon and felt fine. I checked in with my contact and ate something and wrote my field notes and went to bed at a normal time and slept normally. For about a week, everything was normal. The first thing I noticed was the silence. not the quiet ground silence, my own. I'd always been a person who thought out loud to some degree, talked to myself during field work, narrated what I was doing when I was alone, the way people do when the work is physical and the mind needs somewhere to go. I noticed about 10 days after the visit that I'd stopped doing it. Not because I'd decided to, just stopped. The way you stop doing something when the impulse for it has quietly gone away. I noticed it and noted it in my personal log and didn't think much of it. The second thing was the sitting. I'd been a person with a fairly high baseline of restlessness, always moving to the next task, the kind of fieldwork disposition that treats stillness as something to be gotten through rather than inhabited. About 2 weeks after the visit, I was sitting at the edge of a meadow waiting for a tagged bear to show herself, and I realized I'd been sitting there for 40 minutes without any of the low-level impatience I'd have normally felt. Just sitting, comfortable in the stillness, in a way that was new. I noted that too. The third thing was harder to name, and I've been trying to name it since. A shift in what I found myself thinking about during the long hours of fieldwork. I'd always thought about the study, the data, the professional questions that structured my days. I started thinking about other things, longer thoughts, slower thoughts, the kind of thinking that doesn't have a clear professional application and doesn't resolve into action items. I'd find myself at the end of a field day unable to account for where a significant portion of my thinking time had gone. The way you find yourself at the end of a long drive, not quite sure how you covered the distance. I was functioning fine. The work was getting done. The data was being collected. My check-ins were normal. I wasn't impaired. I was just different in small ways that I could observe but couldn't fully characterize, which for a scientist used to characterizing things was its own particular kind of unsettling. I found the gap in my field log on a Sunday evening when I was updating my weekly summary. I keep detailed field logs, daily entries, time-stamped, location data, activity notes. It's the foundation of the work, and I've maintained it without significant gaps for 3 seasons. When I went through the previous 2 weeks to compile the summary, I found 2 days with entries that were thinner than they should have been. Location data that placed me in the northwest section of the study area without the detail I'd normally generate for time spent in the field. 2 days, not consecutive, spaced about a week apart in the previous 2 weeks. I sat with that for a long time. The location data was clear. I'd been in the northwest section on both of those days for several hours each. I had fragmentary notes, things I'd apparently logged in the field, but the notes had the quality of notes taken by someone whose attention was not fully on the logging. Incomplete observations, sentences that trailed off, gaps where there should have been data. I had no clear memory of either day, not amnesia, not a blank, more like the quality of a dream you remember the feeling of without the content. I knew I'd been out in the field those days. I could access the general texture of both days, the weather, the physical experience of being in the forest. What I couldn't access was any clear account of what I'd done or why I'd been in the northwest section when my work plan for both days had me in a completely different part of the study area. I checked my equipment. My GPS unit had tracked my movement on both days, and the tracks confirmed what the field log location data showed. I'd gone into the quiet ground on both days, spent between 3 and 5 hours in it each time, and come back out and apparently gone about the rest of my day without noting anything about either visit. Not in the field log, not in my personal log. I had gone back into the quiet ground twice in 2 weeks, and I hadn't written it down either time, which meant that whatever impulse had taken me there had not felt in the moment like something that needed to be recorded. I've been thinking about Betty's description of the 3 people she'd known, the way their priorities shifted, the things they talked about changing, the way they sat with silence, the ones who went back voluntarily, and the adjustment that got substantial enough that she thought of them as different people by the time they stopped going. I've been thinking about the fact that I went back twice without writing it down and can't clearly account for what drew me there on either occasion, and that when I try to reconstruct the impulse from inside my own head, it doesn't feel like anything I'd call compulsion. It feels like the way you feel when you go back to a place you find restful. The absence of resistance to going, the simple inclination toward it that doesn't announce itself as anything remarkable. I've been thinking about how that would feel from the inside versus how it would look from the outside, and how those two things might be the same in this situation and very different in others, and how I'm currently only able to access the inside view. I've been thinking about the wildlife and the complete consistency of the absence across 3 seasons, and whether what keeps them out is fear or something else, whether there's a version of their response that isn't about threat at all, but is about something more like recognition, something that moves through the forest and understands what the quiet ground is without having language for it, and simply doesn't go there because it knows something I apparently didn't. I've been thinking about how much I trust my own accounting of myself right now. The honest answer is less than I did a month ago. Not because I'm impaired, not because anything is obviously wrong, because I know something has shifted and I can observe some of what has shifted, and I can't observe the rest. And the rest is the part that concerns me. The things you can't see about yourself are the things you rely on other people to tell you, and I'm alone out here in a way that doesn't allow for that. I called my departmental contact last week and told her I was going to wrap the field season early. She asked if everything was okay. I said the data collection was in good shape, and I needed to come in to begin the analysis phase. Both of those things were true, and neither of them was the reason I was wrapping early. And I knew that, and I think she might have known it too from something in my voice, though she didn't push. I've been packing out the field station across the last few days. I haven't been back to the northwest section since I found the gap in the log. That's a decision I made and have held, which tells me something, though I'm not sure exactly what it tells me. Either I'm capable of not going back, which is reassuring, or not going back is something the adjustment doesn't require me to resist at this stage, which is less reassuring, and I don't currently have a way to determine which of those is the accurate read. I'm going to go home and spend some time around people who knew me before October, and I'm going to pay attention to whether they notice anything, the way Bet paid attention to the people she knew before and after. I'm not going to tell them what I'm doing. I'm just going to be around them and watch their faces and see what they see when they look at me. If they see what I think they might see, I'll deal with that when I get there. What I know right now is this. There is a 2 square mile section of national forest in northern Idaho where nothing lives and nothing goes, where the silence is a different kind of silence from the silence around it, and where a person can spend 4 hours on a clear October morning finding nothing wrong and come back out feeling fine and spend the next 2 weeks becoming incrementally less like themselves in ways they can observe but not fully measure. I know that I went back twice. I know I didn't write it down. I know that when I tried to reach for whatever drew me back in on those 2 days, what I find isn't distress or compulsion or anything I'd call a symptom. What I find is the memory of something that felt at the time like going somewhere I simply wanted to be. That's the part I can't stop turning over, not what it did to me, the fact that I didn't mind.